At night on the northeast side of Indianapolis, a bridge beam begins to move. It is about 85 feet long and weighs roughly 95,000 pounds. Below it is a highway project. Beside it is a Liebherr LTM 1750-9.1, a machine in the 900 US ton class. Over 2 nights, according to the crane contractor, 18 beams will make this trip. This is the part people photograph. A giant crane takes a giant object, lifts it through open air, and places it where a construction crew needs it. If you only watched those few minutes, the business model would seem almost embarrassingly simple. Own the crane, charge a large rate, lift the thing, go home. But the crane company says this machine arrived at the site in 17 loads. It was chosen not only because it could handle the job at the required reach, but because halfway through the work it had to relocate from one side of the bridge to the other. The contractor says that move took about 8 hours. A different crawler crane approach, it says, would have taken closer to 2 days and roughly 20 truckloads to relocate. So the expensive-looking part may not be the strange part. The strange part is that the customer needs an extreme amount of lifting capacity for a narrow window of time, while the owner has millions of dollars tied up in a machine that has to keep finding those windows year after year. Which means the simplest question is not, how much can this crane lift? It is this: if the beam is only in the air for a short time, what is the customer actually paying for? And if the customer only needs this machine briefly, why would anyone want to own it? Start with the beam, because the beam creates the illusion. The load is visible, the hook is visible, the crane is impossible to ignore. If something goes wrong with the schedule, this is the moment everyone notices. If everything goes right, this is the moment that makes the project look almost easy. But the Indianapolis job was not simply a matter of bringing the largest crane available and lifting 18 pieces of concrete. According to ALL, the company behind the lift, the crane was selected because the job combined 2 requirements. It needed enough capacity at a roughly 120-foot pick radius, and it needed to move between work positions quickly enough to fit the project sequence. That second requirement matters because the business is not selling abstract lifting capacity. It is selling useful capacity at a particular place, in a particular configuration, during a particular project window. A crane can be enormous and still be wrong for the job. That sounds counterintuitive because the industry markets cranes in enormous capacity numbers. But capacity is only the first filter. A customer does not purchase a theoretical maximum. The customer purchases a workable combination of capacity, reach, mobility, site access, crew, timing, and confidence that the lift can fit the rest of the construction sequence. It can be too far away. It can take too long to assemble. It can demand more room than the site has. It can be tied up on another project. It can require a transport plan that does not fit the schedule. Or it can simply be the wrong type of machine for a move that has to happen between tonight and tomorrow. That is why the headline capacity number is less useful than it looks. For the Indianapolis job, the commercially useful number is not the crane's theoretical maximum. It is the contractor's stated requirement at roughly a 120-foot pick radius, combined with the need to fit the site and the overnight sequence. Real jobs are defined by the load, reach, setup, site, and schedule together. For the customer, then, the product is already becoming more complicated. They are not renting 900 tons. They are renting a solution that has to exist at one exact point in the project, and before it can exist there, it has to arrive. All says the initial delivery of the Indianapolis LTM 1750 required 17 loads. That number changes the story. A normal rental feels like one object moving from a yard to a customer. A giant crane can feel more like a temporary industrial system being transferred from one location to another. The working package can involve additional equipment, ballast, support gear, and transport. The exact pieces vary by configuration, which is why one truck count should never be treated as a universal rule. For this job, the useful number is simply the one the contractor gave us, 17 initial loads. Every one of those movements has a commercial consequence, and the consequences stack. If one part of the package reaches the site while another critical part is delayed, the first arrival does not magically become productive. The crane package is only as useful as the sequence that converts deliveries into a working asset. That makes coordination itself valuable because the owner is not simply dispatching independent trucks. It is trying to make a temporary production system appear on schedule. A truck needs time. A driver needs time. A route may need permits. Oversize or overweight movements may be restricted by dimension, weight, route, or timing. The crane company's dispatch plan has to match the construction schedule, and if the machine comes apart to travel, the project on the receiving end also has to absorb the time required to turn those delivered pieces back into a working crane. This is what the equipment business calls mobilization, but the word is almost too clean. Mobilization sounds like a line item. Physically, it is the chain of events that makes the crane exist where the customer needs it. Federal highway guidance treats hauling and transport-related assembly and disassembly as part of mobilization in the context it governs. Rental companies also routinely distinguish the crane rate from other charges such as mobilization, permits, fuel, or rigging, depending on the contract, which means money can start moving before the hook does. And once you see that, the next question becomes unavoidable. When someone tells you what the crane costs per hour, are they telling you the price of the job, or only the easiest number to see? There is no public invoice for the Indianapolis lift in the material we found, so we should not invent one. But public rate sheets and public contracts show how misleading a single crane rate can be. Bigge, another large U.S. crane rental company, currently publishes operated and maintained pricing for some crane classes in parts of its service territory. On that sheet, a 600-ton all-terrain crane is listed at $1,595 per straight-time hour with an 8-hour daily minimum. That is $12,760 for 8 straight-time hours. It is a useful reference point, but it is not the rate for our Indianapolis crane. Bigge's published pricing for even larger all-terrain equipment moves into quote-only territory. And Bigge separately notes that items such as mobilization, fuel, permits, taxes, and rigging equipment may be billed separately. So the visible rate is not necessarily the total customer cost. This is why comparing crane companies only by the largest hourly number can be misleading. A quote that looks more expensive on the machine itself may package other services differently. A lower equipment rate may sit beside larger transport or support charges. The commercial question is not which line item looks cheapest. It is what the entire job costs under the contract the customer is actually signing. A public bid from the city of High Point, North Carolina, makes the point even more clearly. In that 2019 award, a 500-ton crane carried a minimum 10-hour use charge of $6,500. Standard mobilization was $12,325. In that one contract, getting the crane to the job cost nearly twice the minimum crane use charge. That does not mean moving a giant crane always costs more than using it. Another contract may bundle mobilization into the hourly price. A longer rental may make mobilization small relative to total crane time. A nearby job may be cheaper to reach. A different crane may travel with a completely different support package. The important discovery is narrower. The customer is not buying only time on a hook. They may be buying transportation, permits, specialized people, setup, engineering, standby, support equipment, and the right to have all of it ready at a specific moment. Now the high bill starts to make sense, but only if the alternative is worse. So why did the Indianapolis project need this machine in the first place? A smaller number on a rental quote is not automatically a cheaper project. This is where the crane stops competing only with other cranes. According to all, the Indianapolis job needed the LTM 1750 to work at about a 120-foot pick radius. But the contractor also points to a second reason. After one night of beam work, the crane had to move from the north side of the project to the south side. All says the all-terrain crane made that transition in about 8 hours. It says a crawler crane alternative would have required almost complete disassembly, roughly 20 truckloads, and closer to 2 days to relocate. That comparison comes from the company that supplied the all-terrain crane, so it should be treated as a contractor claim rather than an independent engineering verdict. But commercially, the logic is powerful. Suppose a cheaper machine adds a day to the critical path. The customer may not care that the equipment line on the invoice is lower if the project loses access to a road closure, a crew, a delivery window, or the next trade waiting behind the lift. We do not have a defensible dollar figure for that delay on this project, so we should not invent one. We do not need to. The business principle works without fake precision. Think of the crane as a temporary shortcut through the construction sequence. The machine is expensive because it can make a difficult step physically possible under constraints that matter to the larger project. If that capability avoids an extra disassembly cycle, a longer closure, or a different erection sequence, the customer is evaluating the cost of the whole project path, not simply the crane invoice. An extreme crane can be economical because it buys time somewhere else. In another ALL project in West Virginia, the company said a crawler alternative would have required more site work, more time, and 20 additional truckloads. The point is not that one machine type always beats another. It is that the customer may be choosing between different project paths, each carrying its own site and logistics burden. Again, that is the contractor's comparison, but it reveals what the customer is comparing, not crane versus crane. Crane plus logistics plus schedule versus another way of building the project. And choosing the larger machine creates the next hidden cost. The site itself has to be ready to receive it. A giant crane cannot simply be placed wherever there happens to be empty space. That sounds obvious, but it changes who participates in the economics. OSHA requires crane ground conditions to be sufficiently firm, drained, and graded to support the equipment under the manufacturer's requirements. In the normal construction site arrangement, the controlling entity is responsible for providing the necessary ground preparation. That is a safety rule. It is also a business fact. If a site needs work before the crane can operate, part of the cost of using the crane may appear somewhere else in the project budget. A 2025 ALL bridge project in Tampa gives us a concrete example. In that case, the erection contractor, V&M, performed ground preparation before the crane was positioned. That does not mean the customer always pays for ground preparation in exactly the same way. Contract scopes vary. The point is that the physical requirement exists whether or not it appears on the crane company's invoice. The machine can force the customer to spend money on access, preparation, supporting material, scheduling, and space before the first paid lift is visible. So, the crane is not a standalone product. It is one component inside a temporary engineered system, and the system has another strange feature. The machine that appears to do all the work may require an entire support operation before it can do any work at all. In the Tampa Bridge case, all says the LTM 1750 deployment arrived in 18 truckloads. The crew was 10 people. Assembly took about 7 hours once site access began. Those numbers are from one project, not a universal recipe. They matter because they reveal what a crane owner's calendar actually contains. The machine may be the expensive centerpiece, but it cannot monetize itself alone. If the owner does not have the people and support capacity to turn delivered equipment into a ready machine, the crane's theoretical earning power is trapped in steel. That means a bottleneck in crews or support equipment can become almost as important as a bottleneck in cranes. There are hours when the asset is moving between jobs, hours when it is being prepared, hours when specialists are working around it, hours consumed by inspections and checks required to keep the equipment in service. OSHA's rules create a continuing inspection burden. post-assembly inspection, visual inspection each shift, documented monthly inspections while the crane is in service, and comprehensive inspection at least annually. None of that tells us exactly what an owner spends, but it does tell us that the economics cannot be reduced to fuel burned while lifting. A large crane is a capital asset surrounded by recurring labor, compliance, and support activity. And now we reach a subtle distinction. Setup time is not automatically unbillable time. A contract may charge for it. It may bundle it. It may treat some support work separately. Another contract may put more of the burden on the owner. So if we simply count lifting days, we will misunderstand both revenue and utilization. What the owner needs is not the maximum number of days with a load in the air. The owner needs a calendar in which enough of the machine's committed time produces revenue, directly or indirectly, to justify keeping the entire system available. Which raises a new question. How do you sell a machine like this before you know exactly where the next critical lift will be? You sell something even scarcer than capacity. You sell a date. All says it had 3 LTM 1750s strategically positioned in eastern U.S. yards around the time of the Indianapolis project, and the company believed that availability helped it secure the job. That sentence contains the hidden business model. A crane is useful only when several things line up at once. The capacity has to be right. The configuration has to be appropriate. The machine has to be within a practical distance. The support equipment has to be available. The crew has to be available. And all of it has to be free on the date when the customer's project reaches the point that cannot wait. This turns fleet scheduling into a product. The customer may never see the schedule board behind the job, but that board is where the owner decides whether accepting one project blocks a more valuable one, whether a machine can physically reach the next site in time, and whether a delay today creates a conflict 2 weeks from now. A scarce crane is not merely inventory, it is inventory with travel time. If a crane is booked for a long project, it cannot take another job somewhere else. If a project slips, the owner's next commitment may become harder to serve. If a cancellation comes too late, the owner may have reserved a piece of the calendar that suddenly produces nothing. That is one reason scale can matter. All currently describes a network of 29 branches, more than 3,600 pieces of lift equipment, and nearly 3,000 pieces of delivery equipment. Those are company figures, but they illustrate a structural advantage. A large fleet gives the scheduler options. A trucking network gives the fleet movement capacity. Multiple yards can reduce the distance between a machine and its next customer. And experienced crews can move across jobs with equipment they already understand. The customer sees one crane. The owner sees a network problem. In Indianapolis, that network problem had another layer. The crane and its support loads did not move through empty land. They moved through a regulated road system. So even before the construction schedule starts, the transport schedule has rules of its own. Indiana requires oversize or overweight permits once vehicles exceed defined limits for height, width, length, or gross weight. For especially large movements, the state also has superload rules that can add escort and timing requirements. We do not know that every one of the 17 loads in the featured crane package crossed those superload thresholds. We do not need to assume it. The rules matter because they show why moving an extreme asset is not just a trucking problem. It is a coordination problem. The route has to exist legally as well as physically. A large load may interact with time restrictions, escorts, approved routes, and project access. A delay on the road can become a delay in assembly. A delay in assembly can become a missed work window. A missed work window can turn into a customer problem before the crane ever takes a load. This is why crane rental companies can list permits and mobilization separately from equipment time. The service is partly logistics, and logistics is partly regulation. For a small rental asset, transportation may be a minor accessory to the product. For a giant crane, transportation can be one of the reasons the business requires so much organizational infrastructure around the machine. Yet even a perfect transport plan cannot guarantee that the customer gets the lift exactly when planned. The crane can arrive, the ground can be ready, the crew can be there, the machine can be assembled, and the day's most important event can still be nothing. That is when the meaning of standby becomes critical. Imagine the machine committed to a project. The crew is assigned. The owner cannot easily sell that same capacity to someone hundreds of miles away. But the planned work does not happen. Maybe the project is not ready. Maybe another part of the site causes a delay. Maybe conditions make the planned operation impossible. The specific reason changes the contract question, so we should not pretend there is one universal rule. Who pays for the waiting? That question can be more important than the nominal rental rate because waiting consumes calendar. A well-written contract can transfer some of that risk to the customer. A different contract can leave much more of it with the crane company. And a gap between projects has no counterparty at all. The same parked machine can therefore represent revenue, reduced revenue, or zero revenue, depending on why it is parked. Public documents show that the answer varies. Federal Highway Administration guidance for force account work recognizes that equipment owners continue to incur ownership costs while equipment is required to stand by. In the specific federal reimbursement framework it describes, a reduced ownership rate convention can be used for eligible standby. That is not a private market rule for crane rentals. It is evidence of a broader economic truth. A machine can keep costing money even when it is not operating. A 2025 Steuben County, New York crane rental bid shows a different structure. It called for mobilization and demobilization to be included in an all-in rental price, and it required contractor attributable downtime to be credited back to the county. Again, different contract, different allocation of risk. This is why standby cannot be treated as one neat revenue category. There is paid standby, there is bundled time, there is downtime the customer does not pay for, and there is idle time between projects when there is no customer at all. Two crane owners can quote the same nominal rate and still have completely different economics if one consistently turns committed calendar time into revenue and the other absorbs long, unpaid gaps. Now the business finally flips perspective. Up to this point, we have been asking what the customer buys. The harder question is what the owner carries after the customer is gone. The LTM 1750 is clearly a multi-million-dollar asset, but the public evidence we found does not justify calling the featured machine a $20 million crane. A 2016 trade report quoted a Liebherr spokesperson putting the model at roughly 4 million euros at that time, depending on options and configuration. Current marketplace asking prices we found include roughly 4.9 million euros for a 2022 unit, about 5.95 million euros for a 2024 unit, and an older 2013 unit advertised around 3.45 million US dollars equivalent. Those are asking prices. They are not closed transactions. They do not tell us a current new replacement price in the United States, but they are enough to establish the scale of the capital without inventing a bigger number for drama. And capital does not disappear when the crane parks. Federal equipment guidance recognizes ownership overhead categories that can include insurance, property taxes, storage, licenses, and record keeping. OSHA inspections do not stop being relevant just because the calendar is empty. Maintenance, mechanics, and the yards still exist. Financing, if the asset is financed, still has a schedule. The machine can therefore produce zero lifting revenue while remaining very real on the owner's balance sheet and operations calendar. And because the asset is specialized, the owner cannot assume that any random construction project can absorb the empty week. A common rental machine may have many potential customers. A crane at this end of the market needs a much narrower set of jobs where its capacity and mobility are worth the mobilization burden. The customer pool is smaller precisely because the capability is so extreme. That makes giant crane ownership fundamentally different from admiring giant cranes. The customer sees a rare capability. The owner sees a rare capability plus a utilization problem. A machine this specialized cannot simply be sent to any construction job when the schedule goes quiet. Demand has to be heavy enough. The geometry has to fit. The project has to justify the logistics, and the customer has to need it in the right region at the right time. So the natural unit of analysis is no longer the hour, it is the year. Start with 365 calendar days. Now resist the temptation to fill them with an imaginary utilization percentage. We do not have a trustworthy public number that says a crane like this should be 70% utilized or 80% utilized or any other neat benchmark under a consistent definition. Instead, build the year from the physical business. Some days belong to transport. Some belong to assembly or disassembly. Some belong to inspections or maintenance. Some belong to active projects. Some may be standby. Some are gaps between customers. The important word is not working. It is revenue producing, and even that needs a definition. One contract may bill an hourly crane rate and charge mobilization separately. Another may bundle mobilization into the rental. Another may produce revenue during standby under certain conditions. A long-term project may create monthly revenue even when the crane does not make a dramatic lift every day. A bare rental is different again from an operated and maintained service, so the owner cannot simply ask, how many days did the hook move? The owner has to ask, how much of the asset's committed calendar generated enough revenue to cover the entire system around it? This also explains why a utilization percentage without a definition can become almost meaningless. One operator may call a crane utilized when it is committed to a project. Another analysis may count only billed rental days. Another may count operating hours. If those definitions are mixed, two identical percentages can describe very different economics. That is why mobilization efficiency matters so much. If the owner can move from one project to the next with short gaps, the same asset can spend more of the year attached to paying work. If every short job creates a long repositioning period, the nominal rate may look excellent while the annual economics remain weak. And this is where public data gets frustrating. We do not have the private books of an LTM 1750 owner. We do not know the featured machine's financing terms. We do not know its actual insurance cost, maintenance reserve, depreciation policy, or negotiated Indianapolis rate. Pretending otherwise would make a cleaner spreadsheet and a worse documentary. But we can still use a transparent proxy to understand the shape of the risk, not to declare the profit. To see how sensitive the business is to time. Take Bigge's published 600-ton all-terrain operated and maintained straight-time rate, $1,595 per hour, 8-hour minimum. That gives $12,760 of gross billed crane time for one fully billed straight-time day. This is not the rate for the Indianapolis LTM 1750. It is not a forecast for all. It is a public market reference that lets us build an illustration without inventing a hidden quote. Now choose three hypothetical annual fixed burdens: $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million. These are assumptions, not observed costs. Divide each one by $12,760. The result is roughly 79, 118, and 157 8-hour revenue day equivalents. And that is before job-specific transport and support costs. The purpose of this model is not to tell you that a giant crane needs exactly 118 days to break even. It does not. Real revenue can include mobilization. Setup may be billable. Standby may be paid. A customer may rent for longer periods. A larger crane may command a different rate. Costs may be far above or below the assumptions. The point is, what happens when the calendar changes? The model also shows why raising the headline rate is not a complete solution. A higher rate helps only when the crane is attached to billable work. If a premium price causes the owner to lose enough bookings, or if geographic gaps consume the saved margin, the annual result can move in the wrong direction. Price and utilization have to be understood together. At this scale, losing a block of revenue-producing time matters quickly. 20 fully billed proxy days at $12,760 each represent $255,200 of gross crane time billing. Again, not profit, not the featured crane, just a transparent sensitivity. Now, imagine that those 20 days vanish because a project is canceled and the crane cannot be rebooked in time. The financing does not politely skip those weeks. The yard does not disappear. Insurance does not decide the machine is temporarily fictional. The calendar simply contains less revenue against many of the same fixed obligations. This is the central danger of the business. A spectacular hourly rate can coexist with a mediocre year, and that means the owner may prefer a job that looks less exciting on a daily basis if it improves the calendar. Suppose two owners earn the same amount of crane time. The first gets it through 10 short jobs. The second gets it through one long project. At first, 10 customers sounds healthier. More jobs, more invoices, less dependence on one project. But now, bring back everything we have already discovered. 10 jobs can mean 10 mobilizations, 10 setup cycles, 10 demobilizations, 10 scheduling handoffs, 10 opportunities for a gap to open between the end of one job and the start of another. The long project may use the crane less dramatically on any given day, but it can keep the asset tied to a revenue-producing commitment with fewer moves. That is one reason repetitive infrastructure or energy projects can be attractive to heavy lift fleets. The value is not that wind turbines are uniquely magical customers. The value is that repeated heavy lifts can create a sequence of demand in one project environment. But the long project has its own risk. A crane committed for months is unavailable to other customers. If that customer delays, changes sequence, or cancels work, the owner can be exposed to concentration in one schedule. This is the strange balance. There is also a sales consequence. A scheduler wants certainty, but projects are not manufactured on a perfect cadence for the crane owner's convenience. Large construction milestones appear where the customer's project actually creates them. The crane company therefore has to build a pipeline before the asset becomes idle, because waiting until the machine returns to the yard is already late. The next job is part of the economics of the current one, even when the customer never sees that scheduling problem. Short work increases movement. Long work increases lock-in. A diversified customer list can still produce inefficient utilization if the crane spends too much time transitioning. A concentrated project can produce excellent calendar occupancy until the project itself becomes the risk. The owner is therefore not maximizing jobs. This resembles a route network more than a simple rental counter. The destination of the current job affects the cost of reaching the next one. A machine finishing near a strong cluster of future work may be worth more to the schedule than the same machine finishing far from demand. Geography becomes part of utilization because travel is not instantaneous. The owner is managing a portfolio of time, geography, and logistics. And that portfolio is hard to copy because the machine is only the most visible asset inside it. The rest of the business is almost invisible. Imagine a new competitor with enough financing to buy a similar crane. What do they own on day one? A machine. What do they not automatically own? A branch network, a trucking network, experienced dispatchers, mechanics familiar with the fleet, engineering capability, customers willing to award critical path work, a history of showing up when the road closure starts at midnight, people who know how to coordinate the machine without turning every job into a first-time experiment. All says its broader organization includes 29 branches, more than 3,600 pieces of lift equipment, and nearly 3,000 pieces of delivery equipment. That does not prove the company earns exceptional margins. It does show why the competitive asset is larger than the crane. Even labor illustrates the gap between a simple cost model and the real operating system. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports a mean wage of $33.29 per hour for crane and tower operators in the Indianapolis Metro in May 2025. That is useful wage context. It is not the all-in cost of a specialized heavy lift operator. It does not include the full employer burden, overtime structure, specialized experience, travel, or the broader team required for a particular project. For the customer, specialized capability is part of reliability. For the owner, it is part of the moat and part of the cost. The visible moat is steel. That distinction matters for return on capital. A newcomer can finance the asset, but financing does not create a customer pipeline. It does not create a dispatcher who knows where the support fleet is. It does not create a maintenance history or relationships with contractors who are willing to put a critical path in the supplier's hands. The owner needs commercial trust and operational repeatability around the machine. The less visible moat is the organization that keeps the steel employed. Now we can return to the question people usually ask first. What is the margin on one job? Public data can show us pieces of an invoice, but an invoice is not a profit statement. Go back to the 2019 High Point Public Award. 500-ton crane, $650 per hour, 10-hour minimum. That produces $6,500 of minimum crane use charge. Then add standard mobilization, $12,325. Before any other applicable items, those two lines alone total $18,825. This is a beautiful strange margins number because the physical process explains it. The crane has to get there before it can earn the visible use charge. But now comes the trap. We cannot take $18,825, subtract fuel, and call the rest profit. Behind mobilization are trucks, people, permits, equipment, travel, and time. Behind the crane rate are the operator, maintenance, inspection, insurance, overhead, the yard, and the capital asset itself. Bigge's current public rate sheet makes that surrounding system visible by separately publishing straight-time rates for support resources such as flatbed trucking, iron workers, project managers, and engineers. Those numbers apply to Bigge's published service context, not High Point and not Indianapolis. Their value is structural. They show that the customer may experience one crane job while the supplier manages several billable and cost-bearing resources at once. So project contribution is not net profit. The invoice tells us what the customer was charged. It does not tell us how much of the mobilization payment was consumed by transport, how much labor was required, how much maintenance should be allocated to the job, or how much annual capital cost the project needs to carry. Those are owner-side questions, and public procurement documents usually do not reveal the private answers. And even a profitable individual job does not answer the ownership question. A crane can make money on Monday and still be a poor investment if it sits for the next 6 weeks. That brings us to the only honest way to finish without private financial statements. Change one variable at a time. See what breaks. Start with the proxy again. $12,760 of gross billed crane time for one 8-hour straight-time day on Bigge's published 600-ton reference. Remove 20 such days. That is $255,200 less gross crane time billing. The actual effect on cash flow could be smaller or larger because real contracts contain other charges and real variable costs also disappear when work does not happen. But the direction is clear. Idle calendar hurts. Now change a different variable. Keep the same number of jobs, but make every mobilization less efficient. More dead travel, longer gaps, more support equipment tied up between projects. The day rate has not changed. The annual return can still deteriorate. Now consider a 2-month hole created by a canceled major project. For a general rental fleet, the owner may be able to redirect common equipment quickly. For a highly specialized crane, replacement demand has to match capacity, geography, site, schedule, and customer need. That makes a sudden gap harder to fill. Now, flip the scenario. A strong, long-duration project keeps the machine attached to paying work, reduces repeated repositioning, and makes the next few months easier to forecast. That can improve calendar economics. But now the owner depends more heavily on one customer and one schedule. The model keeps returning to the same two variables. A 20-day revenue gap is painful because the machine is specialized. A costly move is painful because it separates one paying window from the next. Put those together, and the worst version of the business is a crane that is always expensive to move and rarely arrives at a job that lasts long enough to justify the move. The best version is almost the opposite. A machine positioned near a sequence of projects where its rare capability is genuinely valuable, with contracts and logistics that convert much of the committed calendar into revenue. Utilization and mobilization efficiency. Not because those are the only costs, because they connect the physical machine to the annual business. The crane can command a high rate and still fail as an investment if too little of its year produces revenue. It can have plenty of work and still disappoint if moving between jobs consumes too much of what the customer pays. And it can have a full calendar that becomes fragile if one giant project represents too much of the year. This is why a universal profit margin would be misleading. The real answer is conditional. Which finally lets us answer the question from the beginning. Would we want to own this crane? I would not buy it because giant cranes look expensive. I would buy it only if I already understood where the next several years of high-capacity demand were likely to come from. I would want projects close enough together, geographically and chronologically, that the crane does not spend its life being converted from an asset into freight and back again. I would want contracts that make the allocation of mobilization, setup, standby, and downtime explicit. I would want enough fleet depth that one schedule change does not force every customer into the same bottleneck. I would want crews and support equipment that are already part of the operating system, not something assembled from scratch around every job. And I would be extremely cautious about a business plan that only works at a heroic utilization assumption. Because the asset is specialized, the customers are project-driven, the work is tied to project-specific windows, and a single cancellation can create a hole that no impressive day rate can repair after the fact. Now go back to Indianapolis. The beam begins to move. Traffic is controlled. The crane takes the load across the work zone. For a few minutes, the machine looks like the entire business. But we know better now. Before that beam moved, the crane had to be available. It had to be in the right region. 17 loads had to arrive. The site had to be ready. The machine had to be prepared, inspected, staffed, and coordinated with the project. The customer was not simply buying force. The customer was buying a narrow window in which enormous lifting capacity would exist exactly where the rest of the project needed it. And after the last beam was placed, the owner's problem immediately changed. The question was no longer, can this machine lift it? The question was, where does this machine earn next? Because the owner never gets to monetize yesterday's spectacle twice. Once this job is complete, the same capital has to become useful to another customer. The machine only earns its keep by repeating the transformation, yard to road, road to site, site to working system, and then on to the next project. That is the strange margin. Not lifting something heavy. Repeatedly turning a massive fixed asset into short windows of extremely valuable availability without letting transport, setup, standby, and idle time consume the return.